The CNN studio burned under the glare of hot lights, the kind that make every bead of sweat a national headline. Karl Rove sat behind the panel desk, wearing that familiar smirk, the smirk of a man who'd just spotted an unguarded hole in his opponent's armor. At 74, the Republican strategist adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, smoothed the knot of his crimson tie, and settled in like a chess master, anticipating an easy checkmate. Moments earlier, he'd dismantled the Biden administration's latest policy with the clinical precision that made him one of Washington's most feared operatives. The air buzzed with pre-segment choreography, makeup brushes darting in for last touches, camera operators angling their shots, producers whispering into headsets. But beneath the usual hum, there was a sharpness tonight, a sense this wasn't going to be just another safe panel exchange. When the moderator announced, "Joining us now is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas," Rove's eyes lit up like a predator spotting a wounded gazelle. He leaned back with the relaxed arrogance of a man who'd been bulldozing Democratic guests on live television for decades. This was supposed to be sport. What unfolded over the next 25 minutes would instead turn Karl Rove, Bush's brain, into a cautionary meme of televised humiliation while propelling Crockett into the national spotlight as the fiercest new Democratic voice in years. Crockett wasn't here to play defense or spit party-approved talking points. She had come loaded with a story, personal, unflinching, and surgically targeted, that could rip the Republican establishment's moral scaffolding to shreds. This wasn't filler for the 24-hour news churn. This was about to be a masterclass in how lived experience can bulldoze political theater and how raw truth can slice through decades of polished spin. The satellite feed flickered, and there she was, natural hair impeccably styled, sharp blue blazer broadcasting authority without apology. Behind her, not the sterile backdrop of some consultant-curated office, but a personal gallery. Photos with constituents, framed legislation she authored, and military honors from her own family. Every visual was deliberate. Rove, seated in CNN's high-gloss studio set, looked like the embodiment of the Beltway bubble. Perfect lighting, perfect staging, nodding allies in the chairs beside him. The split screen said it all. The career insider versus the woman at her desk in the heart of her district. "Well, well," Rove muttered, low enough to feign subtlety but loud enough for the mic to catch. "Another squad member here to tell us how everything's racist." The condescension dripped like oil on water. Even Jake Tapper's eyebrows twitched, a quiet tell that the temperature in the room had just shifted. Crockett's smile should have been his first warning. Karl Rove had done his homework, at least the surface-level kind. First-term congresswoman, progressive record, ex-defense attorney. His plan was the same one he'd deployed for decades: belittle the resume, mock the inexperience, hammer Republican talking points until the other side's frustration made them sloppy. But Crockett wasn't sloppy, and she wasn't playing his game. "Mr. Rove," she began evenly, "it's funny you want to talk about fake numbers when your whole career was built on selling fake wars." The silence was electric. The control room froze. Camera operators tightened their shots instinctively, sensing history in the making. Rove smirked again, trying to reassert dominance. "Congresswoman, you're a little out of your depth. We're discussing economics, not relitigating foreign policy from before you were even paying attention." That was his first real mistake. Crockett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing just enough to register as a warning shot. "Oh, I was paying attention. I was paying attention when you lied about weapons of mass destruction. I was paying attention when you sent my neighbor's kids to die in Iraq. And I was especially paying attention to how much money your consulting firm made from defense contractors while those kids came home in flag-draped coffins." The studio air went heavy. One panelist swallowed hard. Rove's jaw twitched. "I think you're confusing me with—" "No," she cut in, her voice crisp. I've done my homework. We can talk about your client list. We can talk about the millions you've made selling Access. And we can talk about why someone who's never held elected office feels entitled to lecture actual elected officials about what their constituents need. Rove's accent thickened as his composure cracked. I've served my country with distinction. I don't appreciate a first-term congresswoman questioning my public service. And there it was. The trigger. Crockett came from a military family. Her father had served in Vietnam. Her brother had deployed 3 times to Iraq and Afghanistan. Service wasn't an abstract talking point for her. "You want to talk about service?" she said, voice low and dangerous. "My father came back from Vietnam with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that never ended. My brother came back from Iraq jumping at every car backfire, struggling to get mental health care from a VA your party keeps defunding. And while they served, you sat in Washington cashing checks from defense contractors and planning the next war." Rove's face flushed under the lights. "That's unfair." "Doesn't mean what?" she shot back. "Doesn't mean you should be held accountable? Doesn't mean the families who paid the price get to question the people who profited?" Jake Tapper tried to interject, but Crockett wasn't giving up the floor. "You question my qualifications. Let's talk about the difference between living the consequences of policy and selling those consequences for profit." It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning, and the millions watching could feel it. "Got it. You want this entire scene rewritten at the same length and in the same dramatic cinematic tone, preserving the emotional beats and political punch while keeping it fresh. This will take a little careful restructuring so it still feels like a political gut punch, but with new phrasing, rhythm, and word choices. Here's the rewritten version. He didn't know it yet, but he was seconds away from starring in the political humiliation that would define his career. What happened next would be clipped, shared, and dissected millions of times online, turning Jasmine Crockett into the name people remembered, and Karl Rove into the man they remembered losing to her. Rove, rattled but clinging to his old playbook, tried to steady himself. "Congresswoman, with all due respect to your family's service, you're still a freshman member of Congress. You've been here less than 2 years, and you think that gives you the authority to question someone who's operated at the highest levels of government for decades." It was the kind of condescending put-down that had bailed him out countless times before. Remind the audience of the experience gap, cast doubt on the opponent's credibility, then pivot to safer talking points. But this time, it detonated in his face. Crockett's lips curved into a smile. Not the polite, camera-ready one she'd worn earlier, but the smile of a lawyer who's just watched a hostile witness wander straight into her trap. "Mr. Rove, since you want to talk about achievements and standing," she began, "let me tell you a story. It's about a little girl who grew up in St. Louis." The studio crew recognized the electricity in the air. Camera angles shifted, lenses tightened in. Every word was going to matter. That little girl lived in a neighborhood with crumbling schools and dangerous streets. Her father worked 2 jobs, post office by day, janitorial shifts at night. Her mother cleaned hospital floors and emptied bedpans because no one would hire her without a degree. When she was 8, her father came home from Vietnam missing part of his leg. He couldn't work anymore. The family moved in with her grandmother because they couldn't afford rent. They survived on food stamps and Medicaid, the same programs, she noted. "People like you, Mr. Rove, love to call government handouts." Feet T. Studio went still. Crockett's cadence sharpened. She painted the kitchen table scenes, her mother crying over unpaid bills, her parents choosing between medication and groceries, the VA denying claims again and again. "And yet," she continued, "I watched them fight. For every dollar, every benefit, for other veterans just as abandoned. That little girl decided she'd become a lawyer so she could fight for families like hers. She described putting herself through college and law school, taking cases no big firm would touch because they didn't pay enough, defending single mothers from eviction, veterans screwed by bureaucracy, workers robbed by employers who thought the powerless had no recourse. Now Rove was looking at her differently, as if meeting her for the first time. One day, that little girl, now a woman with 20 years of fighting behind her, ran for Congress because she was done watching people who'd never lived like her family make decisions for them. She leaned toward him, voice steady. "You want my qualifications? I've lived the policies you designed in boardrooms and country clubs. I've spent my career cleaning up the damage your kind leaves behind." Then came the numbers. 12 bills introduced in 18 months. 3 already through committee with bipartisan support. $50 million secured for mental health programs. 400 veterans. Personally helped through VA red tape. And more importantly, she said, "I've done something you've never done. I've lived the life of the people I represent." The air was so charged you could hear the hum of the lights. That little girl from St. Louis is now in Congress, and she's not going to sit quietly while political consultants who've never known struggle tell her how to serve the American people. Rove tried to recover. "Well, I respect your family's service and your journey, but I think you're mischaracterizing my role." "Am I?" Crockett cut in, pouncing. "Because I've done my research. I know about your meetings with defense contractors before the Iraq War. I know about the consulting deals you took while still advising President Bush. I know the millions you've made selling political access while families like mine paid for your policies in blood and poverty." Rove's color drained. "So tell me, Mr. Rove, when you were cashing those checks, did you ever think about the kids coming home without limbs, the mothers who got folded flags instead of their children, the families who'd struggle for decades because of the war you helped sell?" No answer came. That little girl from St. Louis lived with those consequences every day. And now she's here to make sure the next time someone like you wants to send someone else's children to war, there's going to be someone in the room who remembers what it costs. When Crockett finally stopped, the silence was deafening on. The commercial break, social media detonated. Rove destroyed. That little girl and Jasmine Crockett began trending before CNN returned to air. TikTok stitched reaction videos to the moment his smirk vanished. When they came back from break, the dynamic was reversed. Rove looked like he wanted out. His quick-fire attack style was gone, replaced by shaky attempts to explain himself. Crockett let him talk, then hit again. "This isn't about policy disagreements. This is about accountability. You represent the people who profit from decisions. I represent the people who live with them." By the end of the day, the clip was everywhere. MSNBC called it the most authentic moment in cable news in years. Even Fox admitted she'd landed serious blows. Veterans, working class, Americans, and military families flooded her inbox. Her following grew by 200,000 in 2 days. Invitations rolled in, from universities, advocacy groups, late-night hosts. Small-dollar donations poured into her campaign. Karl Rove, meanwhile, found his TV invites thinning. His speaking fees dropped. Even conservative allies began looking for fresher faces. Comment sections boiled down the lesson in plain language. We have too many Karl Roves giving opinions and not enough Jasmine Crockett's making decisions. 3 months later, Crockett was delivering the keynote at the Democratic National Convention. The little girl from St. Louis story was now national lore, and Karl Rove, he was back behind the curtain writing his newsletter. The takeaway was unmistakable. Authenticity crushes credentials. Lived experience shreds polished talking points. And the sharpest weapon in politics might just be the truth about your own life. Crockett didn't just win an argument. She marked a turning point. She showed that the future of American politics belongs to those who've actually lived the struggles they're fighting to change.